At any rate, welcome to episode 21. We're starting a new series this week, and we'll be looking at Genesis 2, 1 through 3. And this series is actually kind of inspired by something Nathaniel said. I was thinking about looking at the ways that, well, basically what would be theophanies, God taking some sort of human-like form in different places in the Old Testament. But actually, your idea kind of broadened it a bit, which allows us to kind of look at the New Testament as well. We could work on the title, but I kind of like the title because it's the humanity of God, or kind of when God shows in the Bible, when God shows human traits like emotion, or not that has to be just a human trait, but
it does strike me as a human trait, though.
We could say, well, definitely when God has a physical appearance in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament we could look at instances of like Jesus's humanity, of course, where you have phrases like, Jesus wept, he was tired, he was hungry, all of those things. And there are some interesting sections of the Old Testament, passages in the Old Testament, where it seems as if God changes his mind. At least from our perspective, at least from how it's written for us to see. Whether it's a prophet going to somebody saying, God, this is going to happen to you. This thing's going to happen to you. It's been determined to happen. And then the person repents, and then God doesn't bring the thing about. Now, there are instances where the person repents, and the prophet comes and said, it's firmly decided this is going to happen. And, so there are kind of those, but we'll look into that. But you have the instance where Moses intercedes for the people in the book of Exodus, and God doesn't destroy them. Now, did Moses change God's mind, or did, what's going on there? And you have instances in Genesis. There are a lot of passages in Genesis, like the ones we're looking at here.
Is it possible to change your mind if you know the future?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, and that'll kind of get to the heart of this series, which is, I believe a lot of this is not necessarily God changing his mind as much as it is for us to have that, it's for us. Like this passage that we're going to look at where God rests on the seventh day, it's something that's kind of modeled for us to do. It's not that God necessarily needed to rest. But before I go too deep into that, because we're going to be talking about it, I did want to mention stuff like the Tower of Babel, where they, where they say, we need to go down and see what they're up to, or the situation in Sodom where they need to go check it out, and that story actually has two things, because it has God appearing to Abraham in a human form with two other individuals, and then it has the two of them going down into the city of Sodom to see if it's really as wicked as they've heard. So it's like, well, God obviously has the information, but
Right.
It seems like he's doing this for Abraham. I mean, I don't want to get too far into it, but I mean, there are all these situations and all these things where it does kind of beg the question, like, why does it say this? And what? Because it's clearly, if you think about who God is, God created the universe. Why did he need to physically go down and investigate, like do an undercover investigation of the city of Sodom?
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that? Or even send people to go down, even send angels or whoever to go down to the city of Sodom and do the investigation? Is that? It does seem in the story that some of that was for Lot and his family to get them out, and also for Abraham. And it does give us a story too. Because if the story was just like, well, God, teleported Lot and his family out and then burned the city, that would kind of be like a different story than the story that we got in Genesis. So it kind of gives us a way to see, like, okay, yeah, those people were really awful, anyway, so this is one of the earliest examples of what we're kind of talking about with this series, and that's Genesis 2, 1 through 3. And since it's such a short passage, we could look at multiple translations. And I do want to hold... The CJB has an interesting... little add-on there. So we'll save that one for last, because that has an interesting little add-on that's not... I haven't found it in the other translations.
No, I haven't either.
Which makes me wonder, do you trust the CJB over... Do you think they're translating some other Hebrew stuff that came in later, or...
What is the CJB?
The Complete Jewish Bible.
Ah.
So especially for Old Testament, it seems like it would be something to look at.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it has a whole, like, half sentence. It has, like, a whole extra, like, half a sentence in this passage that the other translations don't have. And it adds kind of a different meaning to the passage. Or it adds like a secondary meaning to it, at least.
That is significant.
Yeah. So we could read a few passages, if you'd like. I guess, Nathaniel, if you want to read one, then I'll read one, then I guess Bill can read the CJV. If that works?
Yeah.
Tell me which one you're reading. If you're reading the ESV, I'll read a different translation. Because I've got the ESV on my little thing. I've got the ESV, the ASV, and the CJB translation of this. Do you think you're going?
Whichever translation you would like to read, son.
If you'd like to read the ESV, I can just read the ASV, and then...
What's the passage?
Oh, yeah, it's Genesis 2, 1 through 3. Alright. Nathaniel's reading the New International Reader's Version.
Of Genesis 2, 1 through 3.
Yep.
So the heavens and the earth and everything in them were completed. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on he rested from all his work. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on that day he rested from all the work he had done.
All right. Okay. So this is the ESV. Genesis 2, 1 through 3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. And here's just kind of a bonus extra one. This is the American Standard Version. It kind of sounds a little like the King James, sort of. Maybe a little bit. But it says, Genesis 2, 1 through 3, ASV, and the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because that in it he rested from all the work which God created and made. So Bill has the CJB ready to go. And you will see what that little difference is at the end there. And I don't have the footnotes for that. So I'm wondering if there are footnotes with it that explain why it's different. Or...
I have not seen footnotes with it.
Really? Huh. Do you have a theory as to why it might be different? Just...
I have not had really a chance to research that yet.
Well, I guess if you read it, we can see, because it is a significant addition to that section that is kind of a little bit of a head scratcher.
Yes. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, along with everything in them. On the seventh day God was finished with his work which he had made. So he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. God blessed the seventh day and separated it as holy, because on that day God rested from all his work which he had created, so that it itself could produce.
Yes. So that it itself could produce. That almost like gives me a... What was the philosophy was it deism of the Enlightenment period, where they, like, you know, God is the watchmaker that just kind of makes the watch and just lets it go and doesn't really get involved. And I mean, I'm not saying it's saying that, but it does kind of make me question the, you know, because if that's true, so that it itself could produce, you know, it's mentioning God creating the plants and the animals and the humans and all the stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, it pretty clearly says he did, and then set things in motion and then let them continue.
Yeah. I had always pictured, like, like when the birds and when the fish were created and when when everything was created, as stuff was created, it started doing its thing. But it's almost like everything was kind of in a static, not a static state, but in a being created state, and then, like, okay, it's finished.
Well, I didn't get that out of it. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a valid interpretation. I just didn't get that connotation from it. But to me, it didn't infer that everything was static while it was being created, but rather that once it was done, then it was able to be
Oh,
released. Kind of
yeah, kind of exist without new stuff being added.
Yes. Then it was able to be left to its own devices, unless otherwise intended, I guess, right?
I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. But that is an interesting little add-on there.
It is. Very interesting.
Again, there could be another translation that has it, but I didn't see it. I looked at maybe 4 or 5, which isn't a lot, but
very significant difference.
Yeah.
I did not find it in the other translations aimed at the Jewish audience. I would like to say I didn't, my thoughts on that, so that it itself could produce, God rested from his work in creation. But I think about everything he created, and he rested. So, given what we know about him wanting creation to rest and interact on that day, think about the interactions that people and creatures, the potential interactions between people and creatures on that day. That's what I view as, so that it itself could produce. Think of the dynamics within that day, with all of creation not laboring.
I just want to draw a very quick correlation.
Yeah, it's interesting.
To, the fact that it's very clear that space is created by the expansion of the universe. The universe is expanding. Space creates sort of itself, essentially, outside local influence of gravity, large gravitational influence. Space
as far as we understand that
expand.
Today.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting, that would be an interpretation of, so that it, like, itself kind of thing. But I'm just kind of throwing that out there because I know that that might be an interest to someone.
Oh yeah, that is interesting because it is essentially, if the universe is expanding, continuing to expand, and stuff is being
creating itself.
Yeah, and stuff is being fused together and blown apart and all that, and that's interesting. But it definitely, God rested from creating new stuff, but I'm sure he was still involved or monitoring, what was happening.
Well, with the universe expanding, that's not necessarily anything being created. because space is
Well,
emptiness.
it's producing, I guess. I guess it's changing in some way, like we're reproducing,
Well, space isn't really empty for, what's it called? It's not imaginary.
It does have something in it.
Yeah, I mean, particles are continually popping in and out of existence.
Are you talking about like the ether or like the?
No, there's no ether as they stipulated a long time ago. But oh god, I can't remember the term for it. But random energy fluctuations essentially cause particles of various masses and energies to get out of existence, and this is proven by it's called the Casimir effect. Actually, that proves the particle wave duality nature of all particles anyway as well. By putting two plates really close together and particles whose sorry, my physics brain wasn't expecting to work right now, I think. Particles whose like different mass particles essentially exist. We don't know exactly what the motion is, right? The more closely we monitor the less accurately we know their velocity, right? Essentially. Anyway, if you try to decide exactly where a particle is, it turns out that the probability that the particle exists in any one exact spot, basically that probability looks like a kind of like a graph of standard deviation, essentially, kind of thing. And so, like, larger particles have larger wave shapes, and smaller particles are wave shapes. So anyway, put two plates close enough together that only smaller particles have much of a possibility of existing within that space, like ran into existence. It actually creates a pressure, or rather kind of a negative pressure between the two plates, because larger particles are able to randomly appear on the outside surface of the plates, but there's not space for them to randomly appear between the two plates, and it pushes the plates together.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's better than empty.
Well, I mean, I guess you consider that,
and it actually it set which you can the redshifting of light wave, the cosmic micro.
Oh, you're talking about the universe expansion, yeah.
Because the space which it is traveling through continuously expands, the wave itself has expanded and lowered or increased in wavelength, and that's why all the light you can see from the universe is microwaves now. It didn't used to be microwaves, but as soon as the universe became not opaque, it was still super bright, and that's what we see today, is that light that's still traveling.
Yeah.
Way down.
Yeah.
Stuff I find interesting.
Fascinating rabbit holes I would dive down, but something to consider as we go on this break. That's kind of the big question here, which is probably a clue to the answer. Well, I want to say the answer, but what's the real purpose behind God doing this? Because did God really need to rest?
Right, and that is very human behavior to rest.
Yeah, it is. It is
consistent with an omnipotent being.
And one common thread that we will see kind of throughout this series is that, God really doesn't, an omnipotent being doesn't really need to do this, whatever this is that we'll be looking at. It's some kind of human thing that we have to do, that God for some reason chooses to do. And this will get a little different as we go into the New Testament, because Jesus is fully God, fully human, so his humanity, the passages that show that are more just kind of showing that he's fully human, just like that he actually died, and that he actually suffered and had joys and all that, and was hungry and tired and everything. But especially as we're in the Old Testament, you have all these instances where you wonder, if God didn't have to do that, why is God doing that? And I believe, I should say, that there has to be some sort of lesson in it for us, or some sort of example being set for us. Because we are created in God's image, and so there is some sort of, I'm doing this, so I want you to do this. Some sort of example. And we'll get into that when we get back, but that's just kind of a thought there. We probably just have a few seconds left, right, for it?
Yes, 20 seconds it looks like.
I wonder why you have a different countdown than I do, because I'm showing 40 minutes and 12 seconds, so we should have been gone 12 seconds ago, but you have...
I think maybe it only starts the countdown once a meeting starts and someone else joins. 3, 2,
1. See ya in a little bit. We are taking a short break. We will be right back. I digress. Why do people say that? I digress. Are you really digressing? Well, I guess that could, yeah. Anyway, I digress from that, I guess.
Because you digress from a digression, could you possibly be moving back towards the original path of
You
conversation?
realize that you have gotten away from your original topic, and you are returning to your original topic.
Yeah. So is digressing the opposite of digressing the opposite of regressing? Because regressing is when you get worse at something.
Or would it be ungressing?
Oh, I don't know that I want to be around while you ungrass.
Well said. Well said.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, the big question in this passage really is, or kind of the big mystery behind it, which is really the mystery that's in all of these passages that we're going to be looking at. So we'll kind of, I don't know if I'll mention it every time, but I might need to mention it every time, that it's kind of like at the heart of the series is, why did God do something that wasn't necessary because God doesn't really need to do anything or have to do anything. Why did Jesus eat the fish when he came back to see his disciples after he was raised from the dead? Why did God?
We will get to that too.
Why did as with a lot of the questions, but in this case, why did God rest when God didn't need to rest? And it seems like what's that?
Let's take it from the first part of the scripture that you have and progress through it. Don't start at the end. Start at the beginning.
Okay.
I might suggest.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it was finished. So.
Well, there's stuff that happens. Well, yes. Okay. It was finished.
Yeah.
Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, along with everything in them.
Yeah.
So we have this entirety of our creation. And how do we feel about the entirety of our creation?
Yeah. It makes me tired thinking about it.
God, what is the purpose of the Bible?
If you're asking about the creation, or what is it in system,
I'm sorry, Nathaniel, what?
I suppose you have to question the validity, because it would be meaningless to have a negative opinion of it. Therefore, it's relatively meaningless to have a positive opinion of it, because it's the only thing there is. You don't have a choice, right? I mean, if you said, this is the only object you'll ever see for your whole life, here's a blue square. I mean, I guess you could choose to have a bad opinion of that blue square, but I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Well, it's not a bad or a good opinion of it. What do you think is the purpose of Scripture?
I mean, it's given to us for a reason, to have a relationship with God.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is given to us to have a relationship with God, to help us understand how to have a relationship with God.
And to live it out, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to live it out.
Right.
And he is, as we will learn through the Scripture, he is providing examples of people and how to live in relationship with God.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, yeah. Yeah. So we're given this seventh day, and it's interesting that there are a lot of thoughts on the days of creation. I don't want to necessarily make this into like a discussion on what the days of creation are. You know,
I don't think that is important in this.
But it's clearly structured as like it's a week. Like we're clearly given it like it's a week, and so it's like we're supposed to do this with our week. Rest one day, you know. Have one day.
Yes.
Have one day in which we set aside time to consider God, the Creator, our relationship with God, our purpose and place, you know, why we're here. And also to give thanks for being here and what we have, because we didn't make it, you know.
Right.
So if we didn't have that day, I started thinking about this, and this is not necessarily my original thought, because I did hear this from, I think I did hear this from Jordan Peterson, actually. It's something he said, like, you know, most people, you know, there was a blessing to, and I'm paraphrasing what I heard him say a long time ago, where he talked about the significance of having a day where people just kind of reflected on the deeper things, and they just kind of took a pause from trying to labor and trying to take a pause from the rhythm, because if we just work 7 days a week all the time, and if we didn't have a weekend, or we didn't have any kind of if we didn't have that like 7-day structure, if we just constantly every day was like the same, I mean, of course you would you would reach a point where you would be doing a different thing after a year or so but and you never really
took like walking the path with your head down the whole time.
Yeah, and you never really had to take a day, or nobody ever told you to. Would you? Would most people? I'm sure some people would, but
I mean, not in that organized a fashion. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard enough for people to, and we should do this. This is like absolutely 100% necessary, essential, primary. Pray in the morning and evening at least, for a certain amount of time. But even like just setting that time aside is like, a lot of people find it difficult unless they're having some sort of crisis or something there. I heard a really good sermon about it that kind of says it a little better by it's a Charles Stanley sermon on prayer. If you find it on YouTube, he really goes into the necessity of it, and the fact that Jesus prayed, and you could say that that's not necessarily a human thing, but if you think about it, Jesus set aside time to pray, but he was God, but he set aside time to pray. But anyway, without getting into the theology of it, it's almost like, his disciples were seeing that, and like, well, if he has to pray, or if he chooses to pray, and how much more should we? And he observed the Sabbath, obviously. So there's some sort of divine intention in having that day because otherwise it seems to me that it wouldn't be something we would automatically think of. And there are all sorts of examples. I mean, I'm not saying that we necessarily are really good about observing the Sabbath, because there's certainly people that work 7 days a week, because they have multiple jobs or something like that. But, there was a time where everything was closed down on Sunday. Not too long ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, most things were closed on Sunday.
They were?
Yeah.
I guess so. I mean, I'm a year older than you, but I guess I kind of remember that, but...
Seems like when I was
You all were very young.
8 or so, maybe.
Huh.
I think
You all were very young when that changed.
even like Kroger's, I think, was closed on Sunday or something. I don't know.
Really?
Am I wrong?
No, but you all were very young when that changed.
I'm under 40 if anybody wants to know, so... Still under 40.
Indeed.
But you you have to remember, looking at the scripture, God took that seventh day of the week, and he rested, and he blessed that day.
Yeah.
And he separated it, making that day holy.
Yeah.
So he wanted us to consider that seventh day special. Special for us. So that we would consider him. So that we would consider one another. So that we would consider our homes and our surroundings and the things with which we are blessed.
Yeah.
And if you remember the Hebrews, I mean, nobody did any work. I mean, that included your slaves. Your slaves didn't work. Nobody did work on the Sabbath. I mean, if there was an emergency, that was one thing. Your oxen fell into a pit, you went and saved your oxen. And there were things we will see Jesus do
yeah.
that made a point.
Yeah, and that's...
We will address that when we get to him later.
We have
what?
We have. That's kind of how they box them in with that argument.
Yeah, I actually had a passage in Matthew 2 I was going to talk about, because it does relate to the Sabbath, and we did kind of mention here that, how should we apply this? In thinking about how to apply it, there's kind of a good way to apply it, and then there's like a way to, there's, of course, we're not talking about ignoring it, but, there's seeing it, how did God intend for this to be applied by us, versus, because there was an issue in Jesus' day of people kind of taking it and making a religious thing out of it and using it against him, or kind of weaponizing the Sabbath and saying, like, why is he... Well, I'll read it in Matthew, or Mark 2:23 through 28. It said, on the Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, Have you ever read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, and he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to all those who were with him. And he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even on the Sabbath. So it's clear that the Sabbath is a gift, really, given to us. It's not meant to be seen as some restrictive rule, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Even though it might feel restrictive, because there might be stuff you feel like you want to do on the Sabbath, and there's certainly, I've certainly shopped for groceries on the Sabbath. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that, but I guess everybody has. So I kind of am like, am I feeding the beast,
Well, like we try not to.
Yeah.
We try not to do anything on the Sabbath, but we were out of edible things for me. So Laurie went in and got some things for us that, with me with no teas, there are virtually no things that I can consume that are healthy.
Manna's not good enough for you?
She got some stuff for me to eat.
Uh.
But
I could think of a few things.
We don't anymore buy stuff on Sunday.
Yeah.
And we just try to be with one another, sing spiritual songs, watch sermons, talk about God, and just be with one another. That's what we try to do on Sunday.
Yeah.
But certainly to each his own in their interpretation of those scriptures. But I think it's important that we try to respect what we consider to be the intent of God setting aside this time for people.
Yeah. And I did want to mention really quickly the whole idea of the number 7 and that being perfection, right? 7's perfection.
Right.
So, the rest, you had the work and then that period of rest and then that made the perfection, that. So there's some significance to that. And I've always wondered, it does seem like, I guess you could say the moon cycle is 28 days, right? And change or something like that.
Yeah.
How did we end up with 7-day week? It is, of course, from the Bible, but why 7? There must be some sort of, I see some sort of design element in this, and it could be in our physiology or something, that this is the best plan, is to, like, every 7 days take one of those days and take it as a day of rest. And that seems like that's a pretty balanced way of living. Especially if somebody's a workaholic or something like that, it could be a real struggle to take that 7th day and not do what you were doing on all those other 6 days. But again, it's not resting 3 days. It's just taking 1 day. It's just taking, is that 12%, 15%, something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah. So it does seem like a very reasonable, it just seems like a very reasonable thing.
Yeah.
Just on a very practical level, just like taking 1 day to meditate and consider the bigger picture and consider God and consider why. Well, and also, of course, worship. That's part of it too. But
God is trying to tell us that this is important for a human being.
I think some part of that is kind of taking some time to put your beliefs in order.
Yeah.
To order your mind.
Yeah.
And, like, what you're aiming at, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You know?
You would be at your most creative.
Give you time.
Well, that was the Greek. That was the Greek thing with the 7th day or the Sabbath or whatnot, right? That believed that they tried to treat the 7th day as not a day of work, but not exactly a day of rest. Their idea of rest was to engage in an activity that was like painting or an instrument or something, like some sort of creative rest.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll continue with the series. And next week, I know I mentioned what we were going to look at next week. God walking in the garden. After Adam and Eve ate the apple, God walking in the garden. Or not, well, I don't want to say the apple, the fruit. It's not. We don't know if it was an apple. Could have been a pomegranate.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Could have been.
When were oranges domesticated?
Yeah.
Or lemons? Was it lemons? I don't know, anyway.
God walking in the garden and asking, where are you? And there's a lot of very human elements in that, or, characteristics exhibited in that whole story there. And I'll try to keep it focused on God walking in the garden, the theme that we're looking at. But because that is a very significant section of as is this. This is in a very significant section. The whole beginning part of Genesis is very densely compact and with things that you could write books about, in and of themselves. But we will be looking at that next week, and that is it for this week, unless we have another going once, going twice.
Well, maybe
We have 9 minutes left.
do we have any other thoughts about that little last phrase that was tacked on there in the Complete Jewish Bible, so that it itself could produce?
I did want to say that I don't think that is supporting the deistic idea that God just kind of let everything, even if it was just for a day, that God completely stepped back from the picture. He rested, but I would still think that there wasn't a period where God was aware. I guess since he's above time, he could, do like a rewind and, was that a TiVo or a, he could have recorded that day and watched it later. But, I think, yeah, there is something very special about that particular, because that does set the pattern, definitely, that 7-day pattern. But yeah, well, I know we kind of have limited time here, so I'll conclude there, unless we have any other.
Okay.
So join us next time for next part of the series. And I got a little thing here to make a sound for the end of the episode. We kind of do it like this.